The Reverse Evolution of Consciousness Experiment. By evening, Cambridge softened. The damp air over the cam muffled footsteps. Bicycles slid by almost soundlessly. Thomas Wesley stood on the bridge, watching a punt pivot at a slight angle to the current. The girl at the stern missed the moment, and the pole scraped against the stones. The gunwale drifted toward the pier. The boy at the bow suddenly raised his hand, without words, without any visible reason, and everyone in the boat immediately shifted to the left. The planks groaned, the bow slipped through the gap. The friction vanished. The girl exhaled. "How did you?" He shrugged, as if he had heard something before it happened. Wesley caught not the episode itself, but the pause, the instant when action preceded explanation. He saw no miracle, only micro-signs. Weight shift, breath held. He had been catching such pauses all his life. In operating rooms, when an anesthesiologist changed settings by ear. On the highway, where a driver braked half a second before a moose stepped out of the shadows. There was always an explanation after the fact, but the event always came before words. He taught students that language was the peak of evolution. And more often, he wondered, had the peak become a plateau, one where we had lost the climb? Back in his office, he opened a draft smelling of coffee and the dust of field journals. AE-1, Reverse Evolution of Consciousness. Hypothesis: temporarily reduce the dominance of the frontal networks over the thalamo-insular loop, enhance interoceptive signal and predictive regulation. The idea was indecently simple. Weaken the neocortical network's control over the older nodes, the thalamus, amygdala, insula, and see what kind of mind emerged from beneath language. Were there not two minds within us, the linguistic and the rhythmic? He wrote, expected risks, aphasia, reduced symbolic processing, potential benefit, restoration of intuitive regulation, empathy, threat prediction. He knew how it would sound to the ethics board. But the water beneath the bridge kept drawing identical loops on the surface, and in those loops was something for which he had no words. Wesley's lab didn't look like a magazine photo. A narrow room with frosted glass. Next to it, the experimental room, where an old metronome hung on the wall. Nora Chen had set up a camera at eye level to read micromovements. On the table blinked sensors for heart rate variability and galvanic skin response. AE-1 lay in the safe in ampules, a clear liquid with a faint grayish sheen under the lamp. "Protocol clear," Wesley asked the two volunteers. Amelia Hudson nodded. Her fingers brushed the edge of the table and immediately found the metronome's rhythm, as if checking for alignment. Ethan Morris kept his hands on his knees, shoulders tense, gaze focused, a habit of someone used to anticipating trouble. At the committee meeting, Dr. Hahn listened for a long time without interrupting. "You want to temporarily destroy language?" he finally asked. "We want to lift the filter," Wesley said. "Language isn't the enemy, but perhaps it drowns out a range we haven't yet named." Hahn shook his head slowly. A year ago, a protocol lifting frontal inhibition caused reversible but severe aphasia for 36 hours. How do you validate consent if language weakens? Rhythmic consent validation. Agreed pattern 1, 2, 3, pause, Nora replied, barely changing her tone. Hans stared at the reversibility line in the protocol. Doses are small, monitoring continuous, the exit antidote validated in rats. But remember, if you drop the bridge, explanations afterwards save no one. He signed. Day 1, baseline tests, Stroop, working memory, social cognition. Nora recorded clinically, like a surgeon. Reaction to emotional faces, normal. Observed data logged separately from interpretation. Metaphors in notes. Wesley added in his own hand. Amelia notices pauses between beats. Ethan interrupts the test several times and looks out the window. Here's a siren that isn't there. Before administering AE-1, Wesley stopped the metronome. Silence lay over the glass. "If you feel a surge of panic, raise your hand," he said. It was the last phrase he spoke without thinking that words might run out. AE-1 entered the vein like water. At first, nothing. Then Amelia, without looking away from Nora, quietly placed her palm on her chest, a gesture not in the instructions. At that moment, the sensor showed a sharp spike in her heart rate and a synchronous microbloop in Nora's, though she kept her professional composure. Nora noted, nervous empathy matched breathing pattern. Amelia smiled, not at Nora, but at some shared space between them. Ethan stared into an empty corner. "Smoke," he said, "in about 4 seconds." Nora glanced at Wesley. 3 seconds later, the air conditioner coughed a short puff of dust. The laser visualization showed a thin veil of particles in the air. Ethan was already on his feet opening the window, as if clearing an invisible crack. 20 minutes in, speech glitches began. Amelia got stuck on the simple word circle and traced an arc in the air instead, unable to find the sound. Ethan answered in single words, then shifted to nods. Yet both improved in anticipation tests. On a screen where a moving dot changed trajectory unpredictably, they caught it before the turn. "They see the system's inertia, not the image," Nora whispered. "This isn't loss of speech, it's a channel shift. Working term, bilingual perception." That evening, Amelia gestured to turn off the light, leaving only the metronome ticking. She reached out to the glass where Wesley sat and tapped her nail against the frame in time. "Are we in the same rhythm?" he read in her gaze. He answered the same way. 1, 2, 3, and a slight delay. Amelia smiled softly and precisely repeated the delay. If the subject confirmed understanding, they repeated the delay. If they asked again, they doubled the pause. This wasn't a game, but a language that required no words. Wesley stepped into the hall and wrote, "They're not losing, they're changing mode. Language is noise for this channel." By day 3, the subjects drifted outdoors. In the garden behind the building, Amelia placed her palm on the cold bark of a plane tree as if listening. Ethan sat on the steps, eyes closed, breathing like a tide. Nora measured without intervening. Both showed deeper HR variability, like people in meditation, though neither had practiced it before. In the lab, they stopped writing words. Amelia drew spirals, imperfect, slightly shaky, with repeating breaks in the same spot, as if the fabric of space snagged there. Ethan took the same sheets and added thin radio lines to the spirals. When Nora briefly held a sheet to her chest, the metronome caught alignment. The spirals matched her breathing 3 out of 3 times in blind trials. Phase match 3-3. She allowed herself her first smile in the protocol. Drawings as rhythm records. The experiments folder now held a letter. After AE-1, my daughter could hear the dog howls because of the storm, not bad temperament. And a sharp online comment, "You're taking people's language for a journal byline." Nora wrote in a work report, "Working definition, bilingualism, the ability to translate between the symbolic and the rhythmic interoceptive channels." Midday, she gave the subjects a tapping pattern on the table edge. Amelia and Ethan reproduced it on paper, using spacing between strokes. Accuracy recorded. High match. The day brought a test. A technician approached the reagent cabinet. The toxic gas sensor still silent. Amelia snapped her head toward him, like an animal with an inner compass. Ethan was already moving to the door, pushing Nora toward the exit. Moments later, the alarm blared. A thin jet hissed from an old hose. The air carried a faint sweetness. All 3 volunteers in the experimental room moved to the window, silent, synchronous, like a flock that knows when to leap. They felt the air's brittleness, Nora later said, before the signal. Wesley looked at their drawings and realized that primitive was what he'd called what he feared he couldn't explain. He caught himself in a child's envy. They heard the world where he heard words. That evening, he went to the river and watched lamplight reflections until they formed a pattern, the same as in Amelia's spirals. Something clicked in his chest. Maybe evolution wasn't a ladder, but a loop. The ethics board met off schedule. Dr. Han laid photos of drawings, the leak report, and speech test charts on the table. "You've proved your drug turns something on and something off," he said. "The question is, do we have the right to leave switched off what makes us human? And if what makes us human has been covering up what makes us alive," Wesley replied quietly. Han's gaze hardened. "There's a risk of lasting linguistic inertia. What's the exposure limit?" "Strict cap at 72 hours plus rhythmic distress scale," Nora said. "Increased pattern frequency, stop signal." "Aren't we replacing consent with rhythm?" Han asked. "Rhythm isn't a replacement, it's a bridge while language is temporarily offline," Wesley said. Another member, silent until now, glanced at a printout. "Outside pressure is mounting," he said, pointing to a headline. "AE-1 experiment, step forward or regression into pre-language chaos." The board suspended the experiment pending risk clarification. Temporary halt with conditions. Extra monitoring, proof of reversibility, report in 48 hours. Nora was ordered to end all AE-1 courses with the antidote. Amelia, hearing Nora's translation, stared at the metronome and slowly shook her head. She took Nora's hand and placed it on her chest. Nora tapped 1, 2, 3. Pause. Amelia repeated the delay. Formal yes. Ethan, by the window, got the same pattern and doubled the pause. No. Then kept listening to the hiss of distant tires. Letters arrived, one father thanking them for "giving my daughter back the ability to hear the dog crying behind the door." Another demanding an end to barbarism. The press pulled regression from the protocol. At night, Wesley reread his lectures on the neocortical revolution and felt each statement like defending a fortress. "We may understand nothing if we stay on this side," Nora said. "They no longer translate our language, and we haven't learned theirs." "I can't ask them to stay in silence. I have to go there myself," Wesley said. For the first time, the thought felt not like an idea, but a necessity, bodily, like the urge to breathe. Nora was quiet, then gently laid the metronome on its side. "If you go, leave me the rhythm to find you." Behind the glass, Amelia was drawing a new spiral. This one had an empty center, a small dock for whoever dared return. Next morning, the sky hung low, and the air buzzed with the fire of an approaching storm. In the server room, indicators blinked, and as Nora passed, she felt an irritating ring in the tension, a senseless impression with no column in the protocol. Maintenance log, stabilizer replacement in a week. Wesley listened and knew he didn't have a week. He opened the safe, took out an AE-1 ampule and laid it beside a sheet of paper. Wrote, "If I don't return in words, I'll return in rhythm. N." Below, he drew the delay he had once sent to Amelia. 1, 2, 3, pause. Left Nora the anchor pattern, started the backup metronome, server log, scheduled a 20-minute intervention window. Nora entered just as the needle touched skin. "Tom," she said, "if you go, the bridge gets thinner." He nodded. "But it will exist." He pushed the plunger. The world first grew quieter, then closer. The fan stumbled into unstable rhythm. Network pulse, 60 Hz, with beating. Light turned into a counter of micro-oscillations. The cable channel warmed in a point. IR sensor, plus 0.7 degrees C to threshold. Wesley saw a hotspot forming, not an image, but a tendency, as if someone were unwinding a spiral in reverse. He went there wordlessly, like to a child who hasn't learned to call. He lifted the cover, cut the main breaker a fraction of a second before the transformer would resonate. The non-event flash rang in his bones for a minute. Nora's hand on his shoulder kept the pre-agreed bilingual pattern. Her palm hit the beat exactly as his strength left. He turned to her, tried to say thank you, but the words fell apart. Instead, he tapped the metal edge. 1, 2, 3, pause. That evening, the antidote lay untouched on the table. He knew reversibility would restore speech but break the channel. Choice recorded as temporary refusal. Nora didn't argue. He had no science, but he had knowledge that needed no proof to act, like closing a window before the rain. Spring arrived all at once. Grass by the lab wall thickened anew, and under the plane tree lay fresh sheets. Someone's spirals, someone's handwriting. Nora renamed the project Bilingual Interaction Protocols. Method: 1. Rhythm anchoring. 2. Distress scale in rhythmic channel. 3. Paired accompaniment. Anchor here. She removed regression from the title, left transition. The new ethics came not from documents, but from practice. Whoever goes there must have someone here holding the rhythm. Amelia came on Thursdays. They didn't speak, but her drawings became more precise, leaving space for another. A hollow oval in the spiral's center. Ethan brought an old fireman's whistle, not to blow, but to feel its weight in his hand. Finger memory bridged two realities better than words. Thomas Wesley lived half an hour's walk from the lab, by the river. He was easy to find, sitting on the bridge, listening to the water. Sometimes he looked up when passers-by stumbled mid-step, sensing a bicycle behind them. He anticipated others' caution as naturally as breathing. Children liked him for hearing how a dog thinks. Adults spoke of him in whispers, as if of a loss. One day, Nora brought a metronome. Set it down, wound it, and waited until its rhythm merged with the pulse on her wrist. Wesley smiled, and in the same instant repeated that very delay. Pattern match, contact confirmed. It was a hello that didn't offend the silence. In her report to the committee, Nora wrote, "We didn't find a way back. We found a loop. Development is not the loss of the past or a flight to the future. It's the ability to be bilingual between worlds where word and silence are different forms of the same care." Dr. Hahn, course approved as an experimental module with independent monitoring. Risks not removed, but the bridge is built. University newsfeed. In the next building, a course has begun. Cognitive bilocalization, synchronization methods without symbols. Lecturer visiting neurointerface specialist. Press office comment. Project in pilot stage. Feedback collection runs until semester's end. Beneath the notice, someone had pinned a spiral with a space at the center for whoever decided to step in.